And I get to introduce Craig Dalzell, the brains behind all the number crunching at Commonweal, and a physicist. And his expertise, I understand, is in two-photon excited fluorescence. See, genius. Great.
So who wants a physics lecture? I was told that the independence campaign was over and no one was interested in this sort of thing and no one was going to turn up to this. And good to see you all. So, affording it. Public finances were, this is one of the things that we're sort of hammered with whenever we go out campaigning, is how does Scotland afford it? We go through our annual flagellation at the hands of the GERS figures. But we never really go into them very much, do we? We talk about the annual deficit and then that's about it. You never see much more analysis in the news. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the things that the implications that independence will have on Scotland's finances. It draws upon one of my papers that we published last year, Beyond GERS. If you go onto the Commonweal website, allofusfirst.org, we've got a library section. You can download that paper. You can download all our other work on currency options, on central banking, on debt and assets, some of the stuff that George has been talking about. So a brief history of GERS. It was developed in 1992 by the Conservative Ian Lang, now Lord Lang. And its original purpose, yep. Pretty sure that's how most of his speeches turned out as well. Its original purpose was to try and deflate the devolution argument. It was specifically developed for that. Now, I will say that was quite a long time ago. The report has been through multiple changes since then. It's been constantly developed, particularly since 2007 when the SNP took government. They took it as a tool that with which they could better understand Scotland's finances. I'm going to say now there's still improvement that can be done, but if you want to view it as a reasonable assertion of Scotland's finances as a region of the UK, I'm broadly happy with that. What does it not do, though? It does not tell us what Scotland's finances will be as an independent country. That's not just a laser physicist telling you that, that's Deloitte, the credit rating agency. Why is that? Because things change. Even before we start doing things with independence, even before we start developing a lot of the policies and changing our country, just the act of independence will change things. For example, defence. We're currently charged about £2.5 billion by the UK to cover Scotland's share of the UK's defence, but they only spend about £1.5 billion in Scotland. Much of the rest is military forces either based elsewhere around the UK or overseas. So if Scotland's independent, it's going to be making its own decisions about defence. Maybe we want to bring that overseas spending back to Scotland to actually form a defence network rather than an army that's designed to attack and invade other countries. Politics of that notwithstanding, if you start actually putting jobs in Scotland, it has an economic impact. If you bring all of that spending and put it in Scotland, then it doesn't change your expenditure, but we reckon you'd probably get an extra £200 million in income in taxes every year. Or we can spend, we can design our defence network like an average European country, in which case we pretty much spend what we're spending in Scotland right now, about £1.5 billion, so we save £1 billion a year. Or Someone mentioned earlier that we have to be worried about Ireland. Ireland has virtually no military. It's got a small peacekeeping force, and it contributes to the UN peacekeeping force. So if Scotland wanted to go down that route, recognising that we're not going to get invaded, if we start looking at the actual threats to Scotland, it's cyber warfare and climate change. It's not invading armies. So let's be a bit sensible about what we actually need to defend ourselves against. I don't watch a lot of TV anymore. So what else changes? Debt. Now, we produced a paper last year on how countries separate their debt and assets. And, in the last campaign, we went through this kind of thing of saying, well, we'll take our share of the UK's debt if we get our share of the UK's assets. But I sat down and I thought, what assets? No, seriously, what do we need from the UK? George mentioned some money for foreign reserves to support our currency, but he also said you can develop it through other ways. We probably need some military equipment, uniforms and vehicles, but do we really want 16% of an aircraft carrier? It's not going to float. So again, if we're deciding to change our defence network, then do we really need our share of the assets from the UK, which is going down a very different path? So, if we're separating our debt and assets, why don't we take the route that some countries, like, for example, Russia, did when the USSR collapsed? When the USSR collapsed, Russia decided it was going to be the sole continuing state of the USSR, and it took all the debt. It did this because it kept its seat on the UN Security Council. Now, I'm betting that the UK considers its seat on the UN Security Council to be fairly high priority. So, I'm happy with them taking it. That's fine. Take it. You be the continuing state. This was the case they put out in the last referendum anyway, that Scotland would be this new state and we'd have no claim to any of the previous UK responsibilities. Great. Do that, we cut $2.5 billion off our deficit. Here's another one. We've got a lot of civil servants doing sort of the business of the reserved functions of government. Think your civil servants in the Scotland office, well, whatever they do. I think mostly they just write David Mundell speeches these days. No, that's not fair. That's not. So we need to rebuild, we need some civil servants to take over those functions of government. So we base them in Scotland. Some would say they'd probably come to Edinburgh. I'd advocate, scattering them around the country and, being a bit more strategic about it. But if we move them, we're still paying their wages, but now they're paying their income tax in Scotland. They're going to the shops, they're buying things, they're paying VAT in Scotland. Those businesses are getting a boost, paying more business tax. That economic boost of moving the reserved functions of government back to Scotland probably bring in another £1.3 billion a year. This is all adding up, isn't it? Also, your offices even in Edinburgh are probably cheaper than the ones in London. Here's another one. Overseas spending. We were told in the last campaign that Scotland benefited from the broad diplomatic reach of the UK. And let's be fair, the UK does have one of the broadest diplomatic networks in the world, apart from maybe the US, maybe France. It's kind of a relic of empire, as is that building. That's one of the meeting rooms in the headquarters of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Does Scotland really need that? No, that building's worth £100 million. On average, over all of its diplomatic embassies and consulates, it costs Britain about £7 million per embassy per year. It costs Ireland about £1 million per embassy per year. So let's be more like Ireland. Let's have a normal, sort of reasonably costed diplomatic service. For £200 million a year, we could build an embassy in every country in the world and run it. And that's before you go into sort of strategic sharing between countries. One of the sort of lesser known facts about your EU citizenship, if you find yourself in a country in which your home country does not have an embassy, like, for Britain, Côte d'Ivoire Britain doesn't have an embassy there. I think that's right. I'll probably get pulled up on Twitter for that later. But if you're in a country where the UK doesn't have an embassy and you're an EU citizen, you can walk into the embassy of any other EU country and they will have to treat you as they treat their own citizens. So there's scope, if Scotland remains in the EU, to set up sharing networks with our other EU friends and allies. Who wants to get the risk board out and start divvying the place up with Denmark? Other spending. Yeah, we know about some of these. The House of Commons repair bill that's probably going to cost Scotland several times what it cost us to build our own Scottish Parliament. We're talking Trident. The CND estimates that over its lifespan, Trident's going to cost about £200 billion. So that's about 20 billion-ish coming to out of our pockets. To be honest, it's a huge sum. It's not something to be sniffed at, but it is going to be spread over decades. So in terms of actually cutting the deficit, it's just a little bit around the edge. I am still going to say there are far better reasons to stop paying for weapons of mass civilian slaughter. Thanks to the UN and the ICAN campaign, they're now illegal weapons of mass civilian slaughter. Heard of this guy? He caused a bit of a fuss with the JERS figures earlier this year, Professor Richard Murphy. It's a really good book, by the way. You should get it. It's not just a maths geek like me saying that as well. Right? The UK's tax system is complex and notoriously leaky. So there's this concept, the tax gap. This is the difference between what you think you should be paid if everybody paid what the taxes they owe and what you actually get. HMRC reckons that they lose £35 billion a year in the UK through avoidance, evasion, incompetence, error, that sort of thing. Richard Murphy reckons it's more like £120 billion. Let's say he is right. And Scotland recovers a third of that. That's about £3 billion a year off our deficit. We've got a real opportunity to take independence and use it to completely reform our tax code from the ground up. And very proud to say that Richard wrote a paper for Commonweal outlining how his principles and how we would go and do that. So go to the library section of our website, download it and have a read. So what have we done there? That's that wee chat there. We've just halved the deficit. This is before we get into some of the things that George mentioned, the way your pensions move around or don't move around. And this is before we start really changing the country. Got to work out why do we have this deficit? Why does Scotland have this huge deficit? If you look at the deficits, the UK has just started to produce JERS-like figures for Wales, Northern Ireland, and the regions of England. And when you look at it, Scotland makes up about 8.3% of the population of the UK. but we've got 21% of the deficit. Something weird going on here. If you look at Wales and Northern Ireland as well, the deficits of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland make up 55% of the deficit of the UK. But we're only 16% of the population. Something really strange going on here. So we want to look at, well, maybe is there just some regional inequality going on here? Is different bits of the UK benefiting more from the Union than others? I hope you can see this. It's quite a tight graph here. This is a graph of most of the EU countries with their average GDP per capita and the range from their poorest to their richest regions. Most countries, the capital cities, the blue dot there is the richest region. That makes sense. You know, money flows towards power. There's actually some really good books written on the countries that don't do this, like Germany, and which Berlin was partitioned for many years, and Italy, which has a really strong north to south economic divide. Now you might notice that the UK's been blanked out on this. What do you reckon is going to happen next? Yeah. Here's what the UK looks like on this graph. Yeah. Britain's not great. Britain's weird. So, I actually went into this data and I found some interesting things. I actually tried to pull Scotland out to see what we would look like. It's quite interesting. There we are in the little blue line there. Greece of the North, they call us. More like Belgium of the West. Scotland looks far more like a normal country than Britain does. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And again, this is the figures right now before independence. So really, when it comes down to it, what I'm basically asking you is, if you're asking me, can we afford independence? After all this, can we afford not to? Again, thank you very much for that. Commonweal has been working really hard over the last year or so to produce this kind of work, this kind of research. Again, please go on our website, go to our library, download all the papers, and if you like what you see there, we're utterly reliant on you guys for support, so there's a donate link there. I won't say any more about that. Now, just to hand over to someone who really needs no introduction here, broadcaster, journalist, writer, the utterly amazing Leslie Riddick.